Craig Foss.
Hopefully there's still a few listeners left on the radio, Mr Speaker. Well, the third reading of the taxation bill associated with the budget and those issues about setting the income tax, reconfirming the income tax rate, the PAYE rates, changes to KiwiSaver and some changes to working for families. They've been well canvassed by some members in the House and, extrapolated upon and fantasised upon by others. But, Mr Speaker, the budget that announced yesterday by the Minister of Finance is about savings. That's right. It's about building savings. It's about integrity of savings. It is not, Mr Speaker, about borrowing to save. Because regardless of what we've heard from the previous member and other speeches, we're yet to hear where their $45 billion odd of various promises over the forecast period is going to come from. We have no idea. But one thing to the previous speaker, if things were so rosy, if the books were so good in the last year of the last Labour government, why did New Zealand vote them out so convincingly? Perhaps, Mr Speaker, it's because New Zealand also looked at the pre-election update, which showed the decade of deficits, which showed all those numbers that affected the fiscals, as opposed to the 2008 budget, which members on the other side keep referring to. The key document, Mr Speaker, is the pre-election budget and the travesty of the decade of deficits which that revealed to the public after 9 years of the previous government. But, Mr Speaker, the good news is, of course, the decade of deficits is no longer upon us. The budget showed us we will come very close, hopefully, to surplus in 2015. Not too bad, Mr Speaker. I do note a very interesting and good point that the Honourable Peter Dunn made in his third reading just then. If the bill that's before us is so bad, if the opposition disliked the income tax rates in it so badly and thought they should be altered, if they did not like the working for families changes, if they did not truly like the KiwiSaver changes, if in fact they had a plan, maybe a decent spreadsheet as the member opposite apparently has, fully costed allegedly, why did they not table an amendment to any part of that bill? Why did they not, at committee stage, not one amendment, not their tax tables or suggestions or KiwiSaver was tabled? That was the bill that enables it. So it does point to the fact that perhaps they do not have a plan. Costed or otherwise, Mr Cunliffe does have a spreadsheet, I'm quite sure, but I don't think they actually have a plan. We might see it in their Congress over the weekend. That may come before or after the singing. Will members opposite be doing some singing at this year's election year Congress? Because we look forward to it, because we so enjoyed it 3 odd years ago. What was it? The Gambler, wasn't it? The Gambler. That's right. Funnily enough, that might get rolled out. But anyway, the budget, Mr Speaker, passes the 4 tests outlined by Mr Cunliffe in his article in the paper the other day. It creates and helps the export economy. It pulls back the state economy to allow room for the private sector to at least grow and at least start to create and hold jobs, having essentially been in recession since 2005, the tradable sector has, Mr Speaker. It shows a true and direct path back to surplus, Mr Speaker. Passes another one of his tests. I'm interested that he keeps showing the test, but we actually pass it with flying colours, Mr Cunliffe. I enjoyed your piece in the paper because I saw that and go, well, this is great because we'll pass those ones. Mr English's budget, the National Government's budget, passes all of those tests with flying colours. I am surprised the member still keeps repeating it because he talked about the export. Because in the 9 years they had the chance, yes, they are in opposition now, but as far as exports go, the only thing they did to try and compensate for double-digit interest rates, for hyperinflation, if you want, for a 50% expansion in the state, for a 50% extension in the tax state, the only thing they could do to increase exports was to declare an export year in 2008. That was it. And exports plummeted and New Zealand went straight into recession a year before the rest of the world. So, Mr Speaker, interestingly that there's been no amendments to this bill from the other members during the committee stage. I was quite surprised about that. Also, be interested to see forecasters go from 1.7 to 2 million members, still forecast to go into KiwiSaver. I think actually all members do hope that is in fact the case. And that will be an interesting judgment upon the changes within this budget, Mr Speaker. The mixed ownership model was been addressed, even though it's been discussed a lot around this bill. It's not in the bill, but perhaps the KiwiSaver changes will help facilitate investments in the mixed ownership model. And members have positioned themselves so diametrically opposed to that. Fair enough, that's their policy position. It has moved somewhat since Mr Cunliffe's speech at Victoria University on November 8th, I think, last year, where the Labour Party policy was to unleash the balance sheets of the SOEs and their associates, to leverage up their balance sheets, etc., etc. I noticed one of his speeches, I admit I do read his speeches, I don't know if anyone else does, but he gave a speech the other day where that phrase was interestingly taken out. I don't know if they want to unleash the power of SOEs anymore, Mr Speaker, but even if they don't like it, why did they do it with Air New Zealand? Why did they do it with Air New Zealand? But why? You have a mixed... Excuse me, Mr Speaker. The members opposite the previous government, we have a mixed ownership model with Air New Zealand. Air New Zealand diluted down when they had to go get some more capital. Did the Crown stump up? No. They were happy to be diluted down. Very interesting. Actually, that same Crown at the time allowed Air New Zealand to issue not a debenture, essentially a credit note, which essentially would mean if they defaulted, the ownership of that entity would have gone offshore. Very interesting, Mr Speaker. I must call the previous member up on his comments about Standard & Poor's. It was the member's judgment of a C or a D. Fair enough, he can pass those judgments. The key point to New Zealand mortgage holders, households, Standard & Poor's, after the budget was released, reaffirmed New Zealand's credit rating. Mr Speaker, that is worth one huge amount of money to the households of New Zealand, to indebted New Zealand. We all acknowledge we are too indebted as a nation, so each and every one of us, be it via the Crown accounts or via our personal accounts, have benefited instantly from this budget as our mortgage rates, as our interest rates have stayed lower for longer, as they have under this great government, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, one final point. Why does this other opposition over there, why have they lost all faith in democracy? Why do they not like democracy anymore? Because before the election, before the public this year, the public of New Zealand, who are so wise as they threw out the previous administration, will pass their judgment on not only this bill, this budget, but the three budgets of this government. They will pass their judgment, and we will accept that judgment. They may keep us in, they may give us further seats, or they may throw us out, Mr Speaker. Let's wait and see. But I have faith that by declaring, opening the books, putting everything possible before the public of New Zealand shows we trust them, shows we believe in democracy, shows we have faith in their ability to make the right decision, and that is why this bill is before us now, taking effect in 18 months. If horror of all horrors, Mr Speaker, there was to be a change of government, the opposition, if they were to take these benches, would be totally free to change this policy, this budget, and it would be interesting to see their firm position on these exact points. So I do invite other members, if they are talking, as much as they seem to be opposed to this bill, as much as they seem to be opposed to this budget, which parts of it will they put before New Zealand to vote upon on November 26th? Because all we can see right now, the only bits of firm information we have from Labour is they will increase the top tax rate, income tax rate. They may increase middle tax rates. We're not quite sure. Some were nodding, some were shaking their heads last night. They will not be changing GST except on cabbages. Mr Nash started to fly something about a turnover tax. They're still, I think they confirmed they won't change the business tax. So of so far there's $7 billion or so of committed promises. Where are they going to be funded from? Will it be the capital gains tax? But in fact, it is a credit to Russell Norman over there. At least he has a solid policy position, absolutely clouding out the direction of the alternative supposed opposition over here. So good on him, because the party over here talk about painting Premier House as their solution, or not painting it. not having BMWs for the same ministers, ex-ministers, and they want to take these benches, etc., Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I commend this fine bill based upon this fine budget to the House.
Mr Speaker.
Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Speaker, I noted with